The SQL Server Security, actually, what we are tackling in this unit, it is a context via which we have to impose a SQL Server transactions to run in a secure environment. We are not bringing something new, since we started from the beginning segregating and isolating the transactions and all the requests and responses from and to the DB engine. We are enhancing that through what we are going to see, the technology we are going to define in this unit. The SQL Server Security starts with presenting 4 themes, but each is going to be utilized for different approach, and let's say each approach can have actually a severe ramification on an application or on a designed application, on the integrity of an application. So clearly we are tackling security here, since we are presenting the let's say the integrity of the application, or the integrity of the data, dealing with the application. So from dealing with the application in the sense of being submitted as requests or retrieved as responses. So the integrity is one of the major concerns. The 4 themes actually that we start with, they are the designs via which the security is being set. Either we are talking about a theme to secure by design, or a theme to secure the SQL Server using the default architecture, the default predefined methods, the default utilities available from within the engine. The engine here is the SQL Server. Or to secure while deploying a project or deploying a DB from a local to a live, or from an offline to an online. Or the security to be set while communicating medias. Means the security is this 4th theme, the secure communication, is a theme, is an architecture via which we see the transactions being secured. We are not tackling the back end or the front end solutions. It's not the concern. They might be secure, they might not. It's not the concern at all. It's in here. Means we are not depriving them from the security, but no, but we are discussing clearly the stress is on the transactions. Specifically, we will see the secure by code, means writing secure codes and secure coding in order to implement the secure communication theme. 4th. So just a small definition of all those 4 themes. The first one, actually, just to bring you a small definition, secure by design means actually there have been actually a consideration of all the distributions that the SQL Server is working with. Actually, here the security, actually, it is to be the secure, actually the whatever the security solutions or appliances or implementation or all what it has been imposed as security settings, it has to be spread amongst all the distributions. What does mean distributions? Because the SQL Server, it's not a new product, it's an old product and being implemented. We are not talking about SQL Server for an amateur database or for just learning purposes. We are learning the database security principles using the SQL Server, but the SQL Server is a professional database management system. So all what has to be implemented in this regard, it has to be concern of the SQL Server mainly, and the SQL Server is an old product. It is starting from the early 2000s to be seen on the market, and it is colonizing, let's say, or compromising a major part or a major portion from the market, from the international market, the commercial market. The design here of the solutions set on top of the use of the SQL Server is seriously tackled based on via the use of the predefined methods and all the utilities available from within the SQL Server. Microsoft is taking care seriously in this regard. So the design here, we are going to tackle the use of what the Microsoft produced as security measurements, because Microsoft takes security very seriously here, and designers of features within the SQL Server have made security a top consideration in the final design. Remember. The second theme, which is the security, or the secure by default, this is one of the very famous and the very most notable areas of security frameworks, actually, that the SQL Server users will experience. It is actually to be experienced by viewing the security measurements and considerations and approaches while installing the SQL Server. While installing the SQL Server, those default security approaches that would be actually clearly seen and viewed and experienced. Certain features, because of the default security and the secure by default, certain features like the command-based interface, the CMD shell, the command-based. Let me just write it for you, just for the secure. Here by default we are talking certain just highlighted it, certain predefined methods, or predefined, let's say, measurements, they are actually being disabled to raise up the security by default. We need to enable them whenever we need them to be utilized within the SQL Server, but by default they are disabled here as per the literally speaking command-based interface. So we are going to pass commands to the SQL Server, to the environment. So there will be an entry point hard to control if it is open by default. So it has to be opened when we need it only. Secure by default. So in final point here, the secure by default is to see the security setup, the security measurement set up by Microsoft on top of the SQL Server, but while installing the SQL Server. Noel just came in now. Why are you coming late, Noel? When installing the SQL Server. Okay, good. The third theme, which is the secure by deployment. Here, the security is going to be set and to be seen and to be implemented when the DB in question or the project in question is going to be set into production. But as in production means it's going to be delivered to the online environment, and users will be utilizing this product or this database or whatever. Literally speaking, deployment, so production. The security is going to be seen more when in runtime. Yeah, good. And those considerations, actually, the Microsoft has been solved some issues because the updates and the upgrades of the distributions. Microsoft has to tackle the issues concerning the updates and the patches. We know what does mean patch, which is a security update in lifetime. So developers have not to worry about that. They will not cause any issue or any vulnerability or any fraud to the project in question whenever the concern of the update or patch is being imposed. So the security by deployment is the security to be seen on in a production environment. The fourth theme actually, which is the communication to be secured, which is the theme via which we see the communication being secured. Remember that transactions being submitted or retrieved from and to a database engine, which is the SQL Server here, would carry data from available in various forms. Various architectures, various, let's say, data types, and so on. The communications, it's not the concern here of the security. We are not going to secure the SQL Server itself, means the backend solution, or the front-end interfaces, because by default SQL Server is having its own security features. We were talking about the secure by default, the secure by design, the secure by deployment. But here the concern is the transactions themselves to be tackled for the concern of security. It means the transactions are going to be implemented with the respect of the security measures. Remember, chapter number 4, we tackled the enhancement of the TSQL transactions, and we talked about the properties. We talked about the TSQL properties, the ACID properties. We talked about the isolation levels. We talked about the transaction modes, and all of them, they are actually ways how to write transactions. They made us understand that the communication to be happening in between a front end and the back end interface can be written differently. Not only within one, there is no standard one unique solution to be followed usually. No, you might find different ways how to write the same solve the same issue, but with different ways, different codes, different solutions, different transactions. And here we understand that the transaction implementation way is a concern of security. So here we talk about write and secure codes is one of the concerns to secure the communications for theme. The secure by the theme or the themes that they actually seen to secure the communications, they are an enhancement. They are actually solutions to provide a qualitative service whenever we talked about the project on top of the SQL Server databases. What is this quality we talk about? Remember that the security concern here is to eliminate all attacks. And I asked you at the beginning of this class how attackers do attack SQL Server databases. So to eliminate the attacks and the issues is to eliminate the vulnerabilities, the issues, the frauds, the access points, the risks, the threats. All of them, they have to be actually eliminated. Can we? Answer maybe. We cannot confirm. Why? Because eliminating vulnerabilities and issues, we have to eliminate all the entry points risks, which is feasibly on the real plane. We cannot actually. The isolated system means the useless system. We cannot isolate the system. We cannot eliminate all the entry points. Otherwise, it would be actually an isolated system completely. And the isolated system is a useless system. Isolated is 100% secure, but useless at the same time. So, no. We cannot guarantee 100%, but we can reduce the surface area for the attacks. The surface area for the attacks can be reduced noticeably and remarkably. Remember, the more doors you have in your house, the more opportunities an intruder has to break in. The more doors you have in your house, Here, the house is the project. The more doors, the more entry points in a project, means the more opportunities intruders can have, intruders in plural can have to break in to the project, which is a heavier work, a more heavy work for the developers to do in order to control those intrusions, capabilities, or potentials. Because even the more secure entry points here in this regard, the more secure entry points, even they are very secure, still they are considered to be a surface of attack. They are still vulnerable. They are not, because they are not blocked. They have an access. They are given. They can give access. Since they give access, even with a very secure and strong security scenarios, input validation, let's say, still there is a chance for being to be hacked. They still can represent an attack surface. Here, in conclusion, to reduce a surface actually, or an attack surface, and usually it's not only related to the SQL Server database, but this is a security measurement. If you do not need a solution in your environment, rather than that, you have to turn it off. Any serves, you do not need it, you turn it off. Like the command shell we were talking about now in the secure communication, we are going to, by default, the command line interface in the SQL Server is being disabled. Why? Because if you need it, you use it. Otherwise, you disable it, because we do not need it from the initial step unless it is required. Otherwise, if it is enabled, so it represents an entry point, but we cannot control from the beginning. That can be actually compromised and can represent actually an access point for a 0-day attack. And you know what is a 0-day attack from the computer security course. It is a reason to inject backdoors and to inject malicious script to run in background. So thus, services we do not need, we disable them, we turn them off. This is a way via which developers reduce the surface, the attack surface. Whatever the distribution is, all of this consideration is valid for all distributions. So whenever you do not need, or developers do not need a service, they have to disable it. Otherwise, they do talk about an. Otherwise, if they do not disable those non-needed services, they talk about an extra fraud or vulnerability which is not controlled. A larger attack surface, finally. Great. So an overview to make us understand what is a transaction more clearly. This is actually graphical representation that do represent actually a principal securable permission. This is a model that do represents actually a principal securable permission list. The middle we see actually the grant, revoke, deny tasks, whether they are DML or DDL, to create or to, let's say, retrieve and insert data, create objects or to alter objects, or to populate objects or to read from objects. DDL or DML is a definition, language or data manipulation language. Sorry. Right side we have the database, and if you can see here, the three boxes here, they represent the physical architecture we defined at an early age in this course. The physical architecture, we have the server inside the database, inside the schemas, and inside the schemas we have the objects, which are the place where the data reside. this server, this database, this schema, in singular or in plural, they would be actually accessed using one of those queries, either to create or to alter, or to drop, or to control, any, maybe others also. And those queries, they might be actually submitted directly, just one query standalone, one standalone query, or upon a transaction. List of queries upon a transaction. Yes. Those queries, whether they are DDL or DML or whatever, they are actually being controlled using an access control list. What does it mean? Anybody can create? No, absolutely no. Only the grant permission or the granted permission users. If you are allowed to create objects on the database, you'll be able to create objects, create a table, create whatever the object is. Any user can alter? No. Still, the access control list will have the chance to control who can do this alteration or whatever. Anybody can retrieve, see the data inside? Also no. Even simple select? No. Simple select cannot, because to retrieve the data. For example, data here, we talk about the exams. We talk about the grades and marks, and let's say grades and GPAs. No. Only if you are allowed to do so. So the access control list will play the role, the permission here. See the pink box, access control list. Whatever the device you use, actually there will be an interface that can be utilized to specify the permission. Because based on the permission, the access control will allow or not. Based on the session generated through the authentication layer, permissions will be viewed and access permissions will be granted. Each session would have a role to do, because some of the sessions, they are related to groups, not only to users or end users or standalone users, groups. If you are belonging as a user to a group, for example, students, based on the group, you will be awarded an access. Remember, in cybersecurity, we talk about role-based access control. Role-based access control. So what is the role? Actually, it's a function to do. A function, is it a specific function to everybody across the world? No. When we talk about, for example, administrators, well, the administrators, they are managers, they are top level. So there are common points. So we talk about the group role. Here we talk about server login role. Let's say application, let's say base level role, something like that. So you have to understand it this way. So very good example is students as a group. Their role is only to be students. Instructors as a group. Their role only is to be instructors. So based on the group you are belonging to, you will be awarded access. The access control list will be senior permission. What are the permissions to be awarded? Permissions means what task to do: create, alter, drop, control, connect, select, and so on. Any questions at this level, please? Any questions at this level? We took enough time to explain it, so please, any questions you have here?
No.
Okay, no, that's great. So that's great. I hope that it is clearly clear here at this level. Because of the authentication, the access control list will be actually recognizing the permissions to award to every authenticated, we may talk member or group, member of a group or whatever, any authenticated candidate, any authenticated session will be awarded a permission in singular or list of permissions to do based on the group or based on the candidate. This authentication, we are talking about the server logins here. So the authentication to the layer that authenticates the users is the logins layer. If you are capable to log into the SQL Server, you'll be actually authenticated. When you are being authenticated, at that time only, a session will be generated for you, for the authenticated party. And this session will allow to connect to the SQL Server. This session will give permission. First of all, the first and the common point is that it would give connection to the SQL Server, to the back-end solution. And this connection will be given a name, whether login 1, login 2, login, and so on. Whatever. Means there will be actually a path dedicated with a name, with an alias. The SQL Server actually recognizes two methodologies to authenticate. Mainly, we talk about the Windows-based logins, and we also the authentication based on the SQL Server logins. Windows-based means the operating system candidates are authenticated versus the SQL Server. Yes, the SQL Server reads the environment users. The environment users. The environment here we talk about the operating system or the domain. The operating system or the domain controller, the domain members. Yes, the SQL Server can read that. And authenticated members to the operating system, they can access the SQL Server. Yes. Answer is true. Authenticated members to the domain controller and the network, they can access the server. The answer is true. Yes, they can. The second methodology is the SQL Server himself. The SQL Server can store local login details for different candidates, and authenticated users to the SQL Server also they can access the login and get connection to the SQL Server. Logins, they do not mean, the logins does not mean that you are going to access all the database inside the database. No. Logins here does not mean that they are having the chance to access the database objects, which are the databases, sorry, the database management system databases. No, but it means only being connected. That's it. Because logins themselves have no access to any specific database. Within the SQL Server, usually we'll talk here, our context is SQL Server, but it is valid for all database, professional databases, database management systems. They allow only for connection here in this context to the SQL Server instance. Okay, being connected, that's it. Means here the logins, there's a sort of permission to be granted. The logins, they are sort of permissions to be granted to award actually the chance to perform different tasks, different actions on top of the database management system. Login 1 is different, login 2 is different, and so on. User 1, user 2, user 3, and so on. Based on the login details, permissions would be actually granted here. Since we talk about login does not mean that you're going to be accessing databases. No, you'll be only having a word connection. That's it. That's what the login guarantees. The login guarantees only a connectivity. But accessing databases, login does not guarantee that. If I ask you a question like so, login details guarantee all the login details, the credentials, guarantees an access to all databases within the database management system. The answer is false. Why? Because students, they do not have to see the database entities. For example, the exams database. They do not have to see that. So how, and this is a proof that the login does not by force allow the access to databases, but it guarantees connections only. Yet, in addition to the connection, there will be a session. There will be a session generated at the same time, and this session will help logins to be granted server actually permissions to perform certain actions. Logins are entities that can be granted server side, server wide, whatever, permissions, server permissions to perform certain actions, dedicated actions. Certain actions or dedicated actions means who is allowed to create, who is allowed to select, who is allowed to insert, who is allowed to alter the queries. No, those are the actions we mean, the DDL or the DML queries. Yes. I asked you a question at the beginning, actually. What or how the hackers do attack SQL Server? Mainly, we talk about the professional databases, database management systems, generally. This question actually has a very broad answer, and we can actually answer it using different answers, and all of them they are valid. Since actually a user and a candidate to have a direct connection to the resource over a public network, we talk about the internet, for example. This channel can lead to an attack to the SQL Server. This is the first way. If the connectivity is remote and over a public network, so this direct connection over the public network can lead to an attack to the SQL Server. Another option via which hackers do attack SQL Server, which is via the use of the default accounts or the weak password-based or weakly authenticated. Weak means actually not strong. Authenticated admin accounts. The default account is a disastrous account if it's not a disastrous scenario if it's being utilized by hackers, and at the time that the administrators did not cancel or delete the default accounts. The same way, if the administrators they are using a weak authentication mechanism, administrators using weak authentication mechanism. They use, for example, a very easy password to authenticate themselves. He is an administrator and using the password 123 or 123456. So this is a very weak authentication mechanism. Using those criteria, the default accounts or the weak authenticated accounts, hackers do have the chance to attack SQL Server entities or instances. Another scenario via which we can see the attackers attack the SQL Server is using the SQL Server browsing capabilities or services. When we install the SQL Server, the by default security measurements are being set. If you remember very well, the browser as a service is being disabled. Is one of the phases that we pass through when we install the SQL Server. The browser capabilities or potential application service is being disabled. If we need to activate it, we'll activate it. If being enabled, so it has to be controlled carefully. Otherwise, it is an interface or attack service that attacks can use to attack the SQL Server entities. SQL Server browsing capabilities or services. Another attack methodology we see using the SQL injection techniques. SQL injection, the very famous attack against the database in generally, database in total. SQL injection. The non-controlled input points with no validation or input validation, they can be utilized to attack the database instances, database objects by hackers. Other than that, intelligent observations means if the use of the application is public, or the project on top of the database of SQL Server databases is public, hackers, they may intelligently observe the behavior of the project, and they would observe the weak points. So we talk about intelligent observation consequences. So they might track the behavior, and they might use the behavior to gain access to background resources. Intelligent observation. Any questions, please? If you have any questions, you ask, please. Otherwise, I'll take the time.